Welcome back. You're listening to the second part of our panel discussion, a 360-degree view of federal network security, sponsored by Brocade on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. Our guests today are Richard McKinney, the CIO of the Transportation Department, Mark Goodge, the CTO for the Military Health System, Sally Holcomb, the Deputy CIO of the National Security Agency, Anthony Robbins, the Vice President of Federal for Brocade, and Judson Walker, the Director of Systems Engineering for Brocade. We just finished up the first section of our discussion, and I think, Mark, you're making a very interesting point about the shift that has to happen. And I think, Anthony, you wanted to jump in a little bit because there's a technology play here. I know last panel we talked a little bit about, it's not about technology, it's about the culture. But, of course, there's a little technology in there. Anthony, start us off.
Yeah, from a technology standpoint, there's something profound that is underway right now that will be probably the biggest thing since Al Gore invented the internet. And that is software-defined networking. Right, so software-defined networking it's on its way. It's being deployed across many agencies and proof of concepts or pilots and the like. It's being widely adopted by companies like AT&T as they've published a desire to virtualize 75% of their network by the year 2020, public statement. So the opportunities that creates and associated challenges for the federal government or us as industry partners is the number one cost of the government's network today is actually people. The number one source of issues relative to security in the network in the federal government is actually people. So software-defined networking allows you to do a couple things. It lets you to get at the complexity that exists and allows you to drive down cost, allows you to automate and control and provision things in a different way than we do it today. Right? So software-defined networking will drive down cost, it will improve security, it'll help us manage capacity better, and it is something that's going to happen in the network. It'll be the most important development relative to network modernization that we face today.
Richard, I hear again, better, faster, cheaper motto coming out. Anthony used different language, but when you hear this move to software-defined network, when you start looking at what your to be will be, what comes into your decision making? What are you looking at?
Well, I totally agree with what Anthony said about the move towards software-defined networking. But I also want to get back to the cultural piece. One of the changes I've tried to make in the Department of Transportation is I've built a team of between my CISO and my CTO and the associate CIO for shared services, that as we go to IT modernization, that all three of them are at the table and they're a part of the design. In other words, I heard in the first segment you were talking about security that's built in and not bolted on. Well, I think the way you build it in is that you have everybody at the table at the conceptual stage of the transformation, so that the CISO is not a policeman who comes in after the fact to see if it was done right, but an integral part of the design of it going forward, so that it's done right from the get-go. And so as we move to this modern network, I think IT is a team sport, and I've tried to build a team that collaborates across all these issues in order to have a desired outcome.
It's interesting, the word collaboration has come up again, part of the first panel discussion. But also, Richard brought up the idea of people, the change of people. Let me turn to Sally first. You guys at the NSA, I remember Admiral Rogers, the head of NSA, talked about this. You guys have a retention rate of like 96%. It's an incredible retention rate. But if you're trying to make a move to a new network paradigm, if you will, you have a people problem too. Talk a little bit about that challenge and how you're balancing it out.
Well, so our focus is on automating what can be automated. If you don't need people to actually keep up documentation, for example, the system security plans require constant and continuous updating, which doesn't happen very well. And so what we want to do is use some of the techniques that we have for big data analytics to actually populate the system security plans, and that's one example of the automation. So we want to leverage the capabilities that we're used to dealing with in terms of handling volumes of data to do some of the simple tasks and free people up to deliver mission outcomes instead.
And in many ways, when you talk about automation, you also can deal with the security piece too, because if you talk about iterative development or agile, which is, I know, a whole separate discussion in many ways, but it is actually part of the network modernization piece. you can automate some of those security tests as well. So as you're bringing on applications, do you find that you're having to shift some people yet, or people who said they used to watch the blinking lights and now they don't have to as much?
Well, we're investing a lot of our folks into developing analytics for a variety of reasons. We've always been very interested in developing analytics to do our signals intelligence mission, but more and more we're turning that mission on ourselves and looking at our IT metadata to really understand what our network's doing from a performance perspective, from a security perspective, and so more and more we're turning to that, looking at data.
Judson, let's talk about the people, because a lot of them are engineers like yourself who then all of a sudden go, well, I have a new type of engineering I need to view, and maybe some of it becomes more project and program management, understanding what Brocade does and how they work. What do you see when you talk to clients about the shift that's happening from a people perspective?
Yeah, definitely from a people perspective. You look at the technologies of today that are very manual driven, behind the keyboard, making moves, adds, and changes day in, day out. Obviously, a lot of those tasks can be automated, and that's kind of number one, is how do we remove those day-to-day tasks from those individuals, put them more into an architectural role where down there looking at the entire enterprise, from the devices to the data center and the information that's transitioning between those endpoints, and understanding where that data is going and what it looks like, and looking at those different types of views, making intelligent cyber security decisions on how we address that traffic, what barriers we need to put up, what point products that we need to have in place, and how do we create this collaborative vision of how I secure that information from beginning to end. And I think if you're going to see a level of excitement coming from the technologists, because now they're getting away from things I've done for 20 years, and I'm now looking at something that's a little bit more newer, more fresher, very software centric, so there may be a little programming involved there. So your core essence remains the same, but you're now adding a new set of skills based on the dynamics of the infrastructures that we're deploying as far as the modernization effort is concerned.
Richard, when you bring your CISO, your associate CIO, your CTO in, and you bring in the mission folks, what's the reaction? I mean, obviously, if you're walking in, they're going to be supportive. They're not going to shake their fist. Not these people, but do you get a sense that they are understanding why all those people have to be at the table?
Absolutely. There's a tremendous amount of respect between those three parts of my office, and we all realize that our interdependence on one another. That the cyber issues, that we're trying to tackle, have their roots in our shared service, our infrastructure, and they recognize their interdependence, and there's a lot of professional respect between the three of them. So, we really don't go anywhere without the CISO's involvement. We just.
Well, I guess I was looking at it as the mission side, as you bring the mission people in, because as you're looking at the systems, they also all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of people walking in, and they going, "Whoa, what's going on? I always deal with her. Why am I dealing with?" Do you get that sense as well? That's a different change as part of the culture?
Yeah, you're right. You're walking into a mission space that's a little bit different. But, we're walking into, when we have security incidents, we're walking into them, and then they're glad to see you.
There.
All right. And I think the point that the lessons we've learned from some of these incidents is, it's better to have these conversations on the front end than find yourself mired in some kind of crisis and let the crisis be what motivates you.
You never want crisis to dictate. Mark, where are we heading with this? Again, like very similar to the last panel, you have this balance you're trying to achieve of cybersecurity, of network modernization. We heard software-defined networking as the future, according to Anthony. From your perspective, where do you see the military health system heading?
Well, I see us almost completing our multi-phase defense in-depth analysis. So we have really a lot of concierge services in between the external facing, the internal facing, applying those attribute controls to that from a data approach, right? Mostly from a data use cases, applying those things, and then really where we see us going is a lot of alignment for our mission partners, right? The DoD has done a great job with NSA and the rest of the cyber departments kind of laying out that joint information environment, what we'd look like in the future for mission sharing and how we defend what we do today and where we do that at. So that's really where I see us going a lot, is the alignment of what we need to do, taking care of the healthcare mission, providing the right data to the right person safely, securely, wherever they're at on the globe.
Anthony, looking out into the future, I mean, obviously, there's a sense of you give us a little bit of a heads up of where things are heading. But when you work with agencies and they come to Brocade and say, help us define where we're heading, what are things that they need to, what are some of the starting points for you guys to say, okay, here's what you need to start considering first?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are the principles that are driving network modernization are a few that we've already talked about a lot here today. One is kind of designed in, not bolted on. And that is, really important because as we think about the enterprise of today and going out to 2020, the design of yesterday's enterprise doesn't relate very well. And it's, if you just try to conceptualize it, imagine taking today's technology that exists in an automobile and retrofitting a car from 20 years ago with today's technology. It's not doable. And that's how we view the network. It's the same way. It was designed, conceived, architected, and implemented, something that feels like 20 years ago. And so we've got to design in security tomorrow, not bolt it on. We've got to get ourselves to a set of open standards. And I think Sally talked about it, is we're going to move to a position where we're going to have, it'll be behavioral based, and it'll be self-learning. And a couple of those things will be enabled as we build out software-enabled infrastructure and we start making sense of the massive amount of data that we'll have access to that will exceed what individuals can do, which is how we touch the network today. So designed in, not bolted on, open standards, behavioral-based, and self-learning are really important aspects of the network of tomorrow.
All right, I see that's the theme of today, and unfortunately I know we could talk a lot longer with this panel as well, but we are out of time, so you've been listening to the panel discussion, a 360-degree view of the federal network security, sponsored by Brocade, on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. Our guest today, I'd like to thank our guests today, Richard McKinney, the Chief Information Officer of the Transportation Department, Mark Goodge, the CTO of the Military Health System, Sally Holcomb, the Deputy CIO of the National Security Agency, Anthony Robbins, the Vice President of Federal for Brocade, and Judson Walker, the Director of Systems Engineering for Brocade. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for paying attention and taking part in this discussion. For more information about our conversation, visit federalnewsradio.com and search The New IP. On behalf of Brocade, thanks for joining us. I'm Jason Miller, Executive Editor of Federal News Radio. A link to the archive session will be sent to you shortly, and if you requested a training certificate, you'll also receive an email with download instructions after the webinar. This concludes our discussion today. Thanks for tuning in to learn and share.